Hi guys, we're now on chapter 5 of Northanger Abbey. So just as a recap, in the last chapter, we've met a friend of Mrs. Allen's, and if you hadn't read before, Mrs. Allen is the person who's accompanying Catherine Morland, who is the heroine in the story, to Bath, which is a provincial town where she tries to make her name there. Okay, so basically what we saw in the last chapter, we met a friend of Mrs. Allen's. Her name is Mrs. Thorpe, and she's a very accomplished lady. She has a very nice family, and Catherine gets acquainted with one of Mrs. Thorpe's daughters, Isabel Thorpe, who's supposedly the most beautiful of them. Okay, we're gonna go to chapter 5 now. Chapter 5. Catherine was not so much engaged at the theater that evening in returning the nods and smiles of Miss Thorpe, though they certainly claimed much of her leisure, as to forget to look with an inquiring eye for Mr. Tilney's in every box which her eye could reach, but she looked in vain. Mr. Tilney was no fonder of the play than the pump room. She hoped to be more fortunate the next day, and when her wishes for fine weather were answered by seeing a beautiful morning, she hardly felt a doubt of it. For a fine Sunday in Bath empties every house of its inhabitants, and all the world appears, on such an occasion, to walk about and tell their acquaintance what a charming day it is. As soon as the divine service was over, the Thorpes and Allens eagerly joined each other, and after staying long enough in the pump room to discover that the crowd was insupportable, and that there was not a genteel face to be seen, which everybody discovers every Sunday throughout the season, they hastened away to the Crescent to breathe the fresh air of better company. Here, Catherine and Isabella, arm in arm, they seem like very good friends now, again tasted the sweets of friendship and an unreserved conversation. They talked much and with much enjoyment. But again, was Catherine disappointed in her hope of re-seeing her partner? He was nowhere to be met with. Every search of him was equally unsuccessful. In morning lounges or evening assemblies, neither at the upper nor lower rooms, at dressed or undressed balls, was he perceivable, nor among the walkers, the horsemen, or the curricle drivers of the morning. His name was not in the pump room book, and curiosity could do no more. He must be gone away from Bath, yet he had not mentioned. I'm very sorry about that. Yet he had not mentioned that his stay would be so short. This sort of mysteriousness, which is always so becoming in a hero, threw a fresh grace. Just to clarify, Mr. Tilney, who Catherine is in love with, will be the hero of the story. This sort of mysteriousness, which is always so becoming in a hero, threw a fresh grace in Catherine's imagination around his person and manners, and increased her anxiety to know more of him. From the Thorpes she could learn nothing, for they had been in Bath for only 2 days before they met with Mrs. Allen. It was a subject, however, in which she often indulged with her fair friend, from whom she received every possible encouragement to continue to think of him, and his impression on her fancy was not suffered therefore to weaken. Isabella was very sure that he must be a charming young man, and was equally sure that he must have been delighted with her dear Catherine, and would be therefore shortly return. She liked him the better for being a clergyman, for she must confess herself very partial to the profession, and something like a sigh escaped her as she said it. Perhaps Catherine was wrong in not demanding the cause of that gentle emotion, but she was not experienced enough in the finesse of love as the duties of friendship to know when delicate raillery was properly called for, or when a confidence should not be forced. Mrs. Allen was now quite happy, quite satisfied with Bath. She had found some acquaintance, had been so lucky too, as to find them in the family of a most worthy old friend, and as the completion of good fortune, had found these friends by no means so expensively dressed as herself. Her daily expressions were no longer, "I wish we had some acquaintance in Bath." They were changed into, "How glad I am we have met with Mrs. Thorpe." And as she was eager in promoting the intercourse of the two families, as her young charge and Isabella themselves could be, never satisfied with the day unless she spent the chief of it by the side of Mrs. Thorpe, in what they called conversation, but in which there is scarcely ever any exchange of opinion, not even any resemblance of subject, for Mrs. Allen talked chiefly of her own children, and Mrs. Allen of her gowns. The progress of friendship between Catherine and Isabella was quick as its beginning had been warm, and they passed so rapidly through every gradation of increasing tenderness that there was shortly no fresh proof as to be given to their friends or themselves. They called each other by their Christian name, were always arm in arm when they walked, pinned up each other's train in the dance, and were not to be divided in the set. And if a rainy morning deprived them of other enjoyments, they were still resolute in meeting, in defiance of wet and dirt, and shut themselves up to read novels together. Yes, novels, for I will not adopt that ungenerous and impolite custom, so common with novel writers, of degrading, by their contemptuous censure, the very performances, to the number of which they are themselves adding, joining with their greatest enemies in bestowing the harshest epithets on such works, and scarcely ever permitting them to be read by their own heroine, which she accidentally takes up a novel, is sure to turn over its insipid pages with disgust. Alas! If the heroine of one novel be not patronized by the heroine of another, from whom can she expect protection and regard? I cannot approve of it. Let us leave it to reviewers to abuse such effusions of fancy at their leisure, and over every new novel to talk in threadbare strains of the trash with which the press now groans. Let us not desert one another. We are an injured body. Although our productions have afforded more expensive and unaffected pleasure than those of any of their literary corporation in the world, no species of composition had been so much decreed. From pride, ignorance, or fashion, our foes are almost as many as our readers, and while the abilities of the 900th abridger of the history of England, or the man who collects and publishes volumes some dozen lines of Milton, Pope, and Prior, with a paper from the Spectator and a chapter from the Stern, are eulogized by 1,000 pens, there seems almost a general wish of decrying the capacity and undervaluing the labor of the novelist, and of slighting the performances which have only genius, wit, and the taste to recommend them. I am no novel reader. I seldom look into novels. Do not imagine that I often read novels. It is really well for a novel, such as The Common Kent. Oh, what are you reading, miss? Oh, it is only a novel, replies the young lady, while she lays down on her book with affected indifference or momentary shame. It is only Cecilia, or Camilla, or Belinda, or in short only some work in which the greatest powers of the mind are displayed, in which the most thorough knowledge of human nature, the happiest delineation of its varieties, the liveliest effusions of wit and humor, are conveyed to the world in the best chosen language. Now had the same young lady been engaged with a volume of Spectator, instead of such a work, how proudly would she have been... Sorry about that, I'm a little tired. I'll restart. Instead of such a work, how proudly would she have produced the book and told its name, though the chances must be against being occupied by any part of the voluminous publication, of which either the matter or manner would not disgust a person of taste, the substance of its papers so often consisting in the statement of improbable circumstances, unnatural characters, and topics of conversation which no longer concern anyone living, and their language, too, frequently so coarse to give no very favorable age that could endure it. Okay, so the last few pages have probably been a bit confusing. Here's what I understood of it. So basically, the author is referring to breaking the fourth wall, as in including characters reading other novels inside of a novel. So she's saying that she doesn't support that idea, as in she's fine with other novels being present inside of her novel. So, the book Northanger Abbey, it's basically poking fun at the common Gothic novel. Like, they're not making Catherine Morland a very stereotypical heroine, and they're not, like, following the typical story plot of, like, a heroine story. And yeah. Okay, thanks for listening. We'll continue with chapter 6 next time. Bye.